One video with differing perspectives.
The police shooting death of Takaya Young captured by police body cameras.
Shots fired.
I understand why it could be justified, but again, I don't make that decision. Ultimately, a grand jury is going to make that decision.
I think the video is going to speak for itself.
I still can't quite understand why his gun came out.
Hey guys, what's going on? So many of you have sent me this body cam footage of this young woman, Takaya Young, who was shot outside of a Kroger supermarket in Columbus, Ohio. And right now, the media is having an orgy fest on the fact that she was black and it was a police shooting. So when you look at the commentary, some people are saying that this is clearly murder by the police officers. Others are saying that this was clearly a justified shooting. And what we do here is we try to take all that emotion out of it. So you guys know exactly what we're going to be doing in this video. We're going to be looking at the law, the constitutional standard for use of force with police officers, to educate you on what we're going to be looking for when we then look at the body cam footage. And we're going to see if we can determine through the body cam footage that's available if this officer was justified or not. And then you get to hear the spin on both sides to see how both sides are playing it. And that is to help you make the best decision possible on whether you believe this officer is guilty of a crime or if you believe this officer was totally justified in this event. So now let's start with the law. And the seminal case that is followed in every state and jurisdiction in the United States of America when it comes to police use of force is from the case known as Graham v. Connor. And that case was from 1989. In that case, the Supreme Court came to the determination of how all officer-involved use of force cases will be judged. And the standard is called the objectively reasonable standard. And it has some factors. Now, if you've watched my videos before, you know this standard probably by heart, and you can probably fast forward through this part. But this is just going to be a quick synopsis of what we're going to be looking for before we look at the police body cam footage, because there's no reason to look at the police body cam footage if you don't know what you're looking for within the law. The objectively reasonable standard is an objective standard used to judge an officer's actions. Under this standard, a particular application of force must be judged through the perspective of a reasonable officer. That's important. A reasonable officer facing the same set of circumstances without the benefit of 20/20 hindsight, and be based on a totality of facts that are known to that officer at the time that the force was used. So that is the standard. What the officer knew at that time and what a reasonable officer would do. Now, that's different than a reasonable person. This is what a reasonable officer would do. So now to help us determine if an officer is being objectively reasonable, the court has given us some guidance. And here are some factors that we can use to determine if an officer has been or is being objectively reasonable in a particular use of force action. Now, those factors are: one, what's the nature of the 911 call, right? If you're talking about a bank robbery, it may be more reasonable for an officer to use force than if you're talking about, and I hate to say this, a cat stuck in a tree, right? Something minor versus something more serious. The next one is whether the suspect is resisting arrest. Resisting arrest will allow the officer to use force to effectuate that arrest, to get that person under control. So, it's more reasonable to expect an officer to use force if the suspect is resisting arrest. And obviously that force has to be proportional, right? If the suspect is using more force to resist, the officer can use more force to subdue. That's how that works. And the last factor is the serious threat factor. Whether the suspect has become a serious threat to either the officer or members of the community. Now, if that person has become a serious threat to the officer or members of the community, then that officer can use the highest level of force, which is deadly force. Now, if you take each one of these factors, they can help you determine whether this officer is being objectively reasonable. And there are other factors that the court considers, like, for instance, reasonable officer would follow their departmental policy and their training guidelines, right? A reasonable officer would take things into account like height, weight. Let's say if the suspect is a 90-year-old woman versus a Mike Tyson in their prime, right? The use of force will be different in those particular issues. But here, these are just three basic factors. The court says, hey, you can just evaluate these and see where you come out. Now, this is not an exhaustive list of factors, but these are just three general factors that the court would just look at to say, well, can we use these factors to determine if this officer in this moment is being objectively reasonable? And these are the three factors that we're going to use today. Now, we're going to go review the body cam footage. And what I've done is that there were two officers at the scene and both their body cameras are working. So I've synced up the body cam footage and I'm going to narrate through it. So here is my evaluation of the body cam footage. So Officer 1 and Officer 2 are assisting someone who's locked their keys in their car. Officer 2 then gets notified by someone at Kroger's that this woman has just shoplifted from the store, and he goes and tries to stop this woman.
Attendant 29, 3705 Managua, 3705.
What's that?
Female is hallucinating. Much draw for attend.
Hey, stop. Hey, out of the car.
Now, Officer 2 goes to the car and orders the occupant out of the vehicle, while Officer 1 is still assisting the other driver with the key lockout.
Out of the car. Out of the car. Out of the car.
Now, Officer 1 actually leaves his equipment and leaves the car that he was assisting to now cover Officer 2, who's trying to get the person out of the vehicle.
Out of the car. Out of the car. They said you're so stuff, do not leave. Get out of the car. Then get out.
Now, this officer has clearly asked this motorist to exit the vehicle multiple times. And in Ohio, it is a crime to fail to comply with orders from a police officer. For instance, here is section 2921.331 of Ohio Laws and Administrative Rules from the legislature. Section B says, no person shall operate a motor vehicle so as willfully to elude or flee a police officer after receiving a visible or audible signal from a police officer to bring the person's motor vehicle to a stop.
No, then get out. Get out of the fucking car. Get out of the car. Get out of the fucking car.
Now, the suspect, after refusing to exit the vehicle, starts driving their car forward into the police officer. Now, we've zoomed in here so you can see that police officer 1 is actually on top of the hood of the car before the fatal shot is released. The car is essentially driven into him, and he has released the one shot, killing the occupant of the vehicle. Okay, so this was pretty quick, just as the facts as we have them. This officer tried to arrest this individual for a simple shoplifting. One officer went to the front of the car to try to stop the car from going anyplace. The driver pressed on the gas and drove the car into the officer. The officer was on the hood of the car. A shot was discharged, and then this vehicle drove forward and eventually stopped. When the officers got into the car, they found that the driver was killed from the gunshot wound. So now let's go back to our factors to see if this was objectively reasonable. Factor number 1, what's the nature of the 911 call? Well, the nature of the call for service was a simple shoplifting, right? Shoplifting, this is a petty crime. So the nature of the 911 call was shoplifting. The second factor that we got to evaluate was the person resisting arrest? I think you would say yes, the person was resisting arrest. The person refused to exit the vehicle. The person wasn't complying with police request. So yes, at that point in time, you can, I think, definitively say the person was resisting arrest. But that's not the end all be all, because even if the person was resisting arrest, it doesn't mean you shoot them. It all depends on how they were resisting arrest and what force they were using to get away. So right now, the nature of the 911 call seems to be minor, and the resistance of the arrest seemed to have started out as minor. The person was resisting arrest. And 3, we're looking at whether this person became a serious threat to the officers and members of the community. Well, an officer was standing in front of the car, and the person drove the car into the officer, and the officer eventually ended up on top of the hood of the car while the car was actually moving, and this officer then discharged their weapon. So, now you guys have to evaluate whether, if you're an officer standing in front of a car and somebody drives a car into you, do you consider that a serious threat? Now, what I mean by serious threat, could that have caused you serious bodily injury or even killed you? That, I think, is the crux of this argument. An officer standing in front of a car, and the car is driven into that officer, and the officer is literally on top of the car. Is that a serious enough threat that an officer could use force or deadly physical force against the occupant of that vehicle? Some would say yes. Others would say no. But I think this is going to be the crux of our evaluation. Now that you now have a reasonable understanding of the law, have a reasonable understanding of the facts, let's now see how this is being covered by the news media. So let's start with a local news affiliate in Columbus, Ohio, and see how they're covering this part of the case.
Kiana. Well, Tracy, that all happened very quickly. The family was in and out of the room just behind me here within 15 minutes. And as you can imagine, they were devastated after seeing that video. We briefly spoke to one of the attorneys afterwards, and she says that the video speaks for itself. She says that she didn't see any justification for use of deadly force.
I saw a young woman get killed. we're going to work through the legal process and how that plays out. But I in that video, I didn't see any exoneration for the police officer.
And this was the moment the family came out from viewing the body cam footage. Takaya's grandmother, Nadine Young, on the right, in tears after watching it. About 7 family members total walked out very quietly, many of them wiping tears, sharing hugs, but taking it all in quietly. And their attorneys say that they're going to pursue all forms of justice that they can receive, including charges being brought against the officer who pulled the trigger. And Tracy, there have been many questions about what took so long to release the body cam video. The chief saying that the legal review and redaction process was both complicated and time consuming, and that process included having someone outside of Blendon Township come in and review that video to provide context and not make any conclusions about whether the use of deadly force was legally justified.
So, okay. The family says the video speaks for itself. There was no reason to use deadly physical force in that moment. Now, there's also some people on TikTok who are also saying the same thing.
This pregnant black woman, Takaya Young, was shot and killed because they thought she stole some liquor. So they got a call that she had stolen some liquor, right? So they go out to her car, right? So she's getting ready to pull off. One of the officers pulls out a gun because she hasn't got out the car yet, right? And so her car pulls forward a little bit, very much likely she's scared. You pulled a gun out of her and her car shifted a little bit because it was probably in drive, correct? And so then he shoots her and kills her and then continues to tell her to come out the car. She's dead now. You're talking about come out the car. She's gone. So I'm trying to figure out how liquor equates to you need to die. And even if she did steal it, she needs to end her life over that? Like, her car jerked a little bit. Y'all need better training.
She deserves justice. Not only was her life horrifically taken, but her daughter's life was ended as well. And there's a lot of discourse surrounding her death and stating that she was stealing or that their actions were justified. And to witnesses on the scene, there was absolutely no justification for her death. Justice for Takaya Young.
So you see, TikTok is just going crazy. They essentially are saying, yes, she was murdered, right? Forget about the facts. But now let's see how ABC News, this is mainstream media, let's see how they're portraying this.
Prosecutor criminal defense attorney Bernarda Villalona. So Bernarda, I guess first of all, I just want to get your reaction to the video from a legal standpoint.
Very difficult to watch this video because there are no winners in this case. Unfortunately, the life of a 21-year-old woman was lost. And then the question is someone criminally responsible for it? I can see the arguments on both sides. It's an issue of fact. Did this officer believe that his life was in imminent danger of death or serious bodily injury? And if that's the case, then there wouldn't be any charges.
Now, I would say, again, if that's the case, the officer standing in front of the car, the person hits the gas and sends the car into the officer. The officer's on top of the hood. We all saw it. Is that enough? Is that enough for you?
Then if you look at from the side of the victim here, was she nervous? Was she scared? Was she intending to actually drive through the officer and injure the officer? That's a question that we probably will never know.
Now, I'm going to ask you this. Is that question even relevant? Was she scared? Was she at that moment in time, right? You're the officer. You don't know what's in her mind. Only thing you know is that you've told her to come out the car. Remember, you said, come out the car, get out the car. She said, no, I'm not getting out the car, right? No, I'm not getting out the car. And then proceeds to drive the car into the officer. So can we reasonably say she was just so scared that she's going to drive her car into the officer? Is that really, is that even relevant? I think this, unfortunately, this attorney is trying to make an issue of something that's totally irrelevant. The relevant part of this is these officers gave her multiple commands. It wasn't just one time. They gave her multiple commands. They had a conversation. Get out the car. She rolled down the window. Get out the car. We believe you stole something. Let's figure this thing out. No. Disobeying officer's commands and then driving the car into the officer where the officer was on top of the vehicle. Now she's saying, well, it all depends on what she thought and what she felt. And I don't think that's relevant at all.
So is there anything about this shooting that could be seen in that video? Right, and there's always more to the video. There's minutes, before and after. We're seeing this part, but from what you could...
And see, that's why I played the part before the video when they were helping the other motorists trying to get into their car, to when they first confronted her, to then after the incident. So you saw the whole thing through. And you saw it from the two body camera perspectives.
See anything there justifiable, or do you think these officers will face charges? And do you need to see the rest of the video?
So I do need to see additional video footage and actually probably play that video a couple more times, because there is a question of fact, that being, where was the officer exactly at the moment where Miss Young accelerated her vehicle?
And it's wild because maybe they didn't look at this video, but you can see the officer is directly in front of the car. His right hand is on the hood. His left hand is on the hood. His right hand has his firearm, and the car is driving toward him. That's exactly where he's at. He didn't jump in front of the moving car. The car was stopped. He's in front of it, and she drove the car into him, and he ended up on the hood of the car.
And did she accelerate after or before he actually went in front of this vehicle?
It was clearly she accelerated after he was already in front of the vehicle. That's clear. You can see that from the body camera footage. Again, I think this attorney doesn't want to just say that it seems like this officer was totally justified. I think, but again, that's because this is left-wing media and they don't want to just say the facts of what you see with your own eyes, right? The officer was clearly in front of the vehicle before the vehicle started to move, and she drove the car into the officer. Those are facts that can't be disputed. We're looking at them.
Well, I think because there's an issue of fact, there still has to be additional investigation. The question would be is whether the district attorney's office would put this case before a grand jury and let a grand jury determine the issue of fact, whether it was reasonable for this officer to fire into a moving vehicle, if the vehicle was actually moving at that time.
Well, again, and it shows you one thing. This, I think, shows you how when the media get people to just do these interviews, even after seeing the video, because you saw the video just like I did. You saw the video just like she did. And we're all looking at the same video. It's clear the officer was in front of the car when the car was stopped. They told her to get out. She drove the car into the officer, and she's still saying it's still a question of whether the car was moving when the officer shot into the moving vehicle, whether it was driving to the officer. There's no questions here. It's all on video. You see the video. But again, this is kind of how they make it so muddy, because that's why those people on TikTok are saying, hey, there's all these questions involved, even when the facts are right in front of their eyes. They're close to the facts, but their eyes are open to the emotion, to the narrative that they want to press. This white cop shot this black woman, and he should be put in jail.
Got it. All right. Well, an attorney for the young family says that the family has been frustrated with delays in the police department timeline here of releasing the body cam footage we just saw.
So now you've seen the facts, right? You've seen the law. You've seen how one side is trying to essentially spin it to say that these police officers were not justified at all in taking this particular action. But let me just tell you kind of how I feel. I feel that this was a simple case. I feel that this woman jumped into her car. The officers approached her, as we saw from the body cam footage. They said, get out the car, numerous times, right? Get out the car. So she wouldn't drive away. Another officer stood in front of the car and stood there, so she couldn't drive away. She would have to literally drive through the officer to escape. She began as resisting arrest. The officer said, well, now get out the car because we need to talk to you about this particular petty theft. She then pushed the accelerator down, propelling the vehicle forward, hitting the officer. The officer ends up on top of the hood of the car, fires one shot into the vehicle, and then she's killed in that process. If you're asking me if this was reasonable for this officer to do what he did, I believe in those circumstances, yes. If someone drives a car into your body while you're pointing a gun at them, then yes, it's reasonable for you to react in that way. You can be seriously injured or killed in that moment. But let me know what you think. Because, again, it's not about what I think about it. It's about what you think about it. Like, share, subscribe, do all that great YouTube stuff. And don't forget, if you really made it to this part of the video and you liked this detailed analysis, why haven't you subscribed to the channel yet? My name is Nate the Lawyer. I'll see you next time. Peace.